Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of the Tabadlab Policy Roundtables. Today we're going to, in many ways, continue a discussion that we began last week that was prompted by the state of Karachi after some unprecedented rains that caused significant, substantial challenges. And many of those challenges really exposed not just Karachi, but really questions about the state of cities in general in a country like Pakistan. You look to the east and to the west, to the north and to the south of Pakistan, and in every direction, urban spaces are being challenged by a whole range of issues, overcrowding being the easiest one, but the one that is most prominent and consistently a source of difficulty for cities is climate change. I think we've assembled a really fun and very enlightened panel of experts. We're joined today by Nasratullah Elham from Afghanistan. Nasratullah is a climate youth activist who's been part of the UN Youth Climate Summit, and I think among many, many millions really represents entirely the future of this region. The South Asia, Central Asia region is home to one of the world's youngest populations. And so we're delighted to have Nasratullah represent not just himself and his country, but young people in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and the GCC. And speaking of the GCC, we're delighted to be joined by Mohammad Rizwan. Rizwan is based in the UAE, has spent many years working on urban issues across the breadth and depth of big cities in the Gulf region, including the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. He's worked on urban transport planning, urban transportation, urban streets, road pedestrianization, and is particularly interested in highways and expressways and how those interact with local populations. We're also joined today by Gopa Samanta. Dr. Gopa Samanta is a professor of geography at the University of Burdwan in India. She's the author of a book called Dancing with the River, which talks about the integration between coastal communities and their ecosystem. And, you know, I think coastal communities in the whole region, not just in India, but in Pakistan, in the GCC are incredibly important. We're also lucky to be joined by Marvi Mazhar, who is the director at Peace Niche, which is an urban space. And he's the co-founder of the Architectural Design Research Lab, which is part of the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture. Marvi is a commentator and a really important voice for a city like Karachi, so we're delighted to have her as the resident Karachi expert, although I think we'll all have strong views about Karachi. And last but not least, we're joined by Wali Modadiq, who is a longtime forester and spent a lot of his career with the Ministry of Agriculture in Afghanistan. He's based in Kabul and currently works for the United Nations Environmental Program in Afghanistan, looking at urban issues in Afghanistan. Kabul is, of course, one of the fastest growing and really most complex cities in the region. So delighted to have friends from Kabul from Calcutta, from India, from the GCC, and of course within Pakistan, from Karachi. Delighted to have all of you with us. Thank you for joining me and Tabadlab policy roundtables. I wanted to start with Wali Modadiq, but I'm not sure that he can hear me or that we'll be able to hear him. So, with apologies to Wali, maybe we start with the youngest person on the panel, Nasratullah. Kabul is I don't know if you live in Kabul or not, but Kabul has been one of the fastest growing cities in the region. Most of the conversations around Kabul have to do with conflict and have to do with the current peace process. And not enough attention, I guess, is being paid to climate issues. How do you feel about that? And what is the solution? How do we get more attention on climate in a place like Kabul and in a country like Afghanistan? Nasratullah.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me here. So just for disclosure, I am 18 years old and I'm just a high school graduate. So I would mostly focus on the first part of the question, and which is mostly about the feeling, and that's pretty much all the climate activism movement is based upon, which is the way we feel, the way the young generation feel is, and the way they want things to be done. So the other part of the question, which was about solution, so I would pretty much hesitate going into depth in that part because I totally lack expertise in that. Even in climate change, pretty much all climate activists lack the in-depth expertise. And part of what we do is to tell the people in power, to tell governments and other power elite to listen to expert, not us, but to expert. So yeah, of course, Kabul is a fastest growing city in the region. However, it's not only conflict that hurdle this process, and it's not. It's also climate change that prevent this process and also provide lots of speed bumps. And one of the main reason is that we are an economically disadvantaged country, so a capital. Therefore, there are lots of loopholes in our economic system, also our government system that makes us so much vulnerable to the devastating impacts of climate change, because it is super hard to apply some of the globally known solutions to climate change and their impacts in Kabul, because it's a totally different story in Kabul or in a developing country like Afghanistan than to the West, because it is super hard. I mean, in the West, we can come out of the streets and tell people to divest from the fossil fuel industry or other industries that plainly contribute to the impacts of climate change. But it's super hard to say this in Afghanistan. The first thing is the public opinion. It's so people don't have much of awareness on this issue. And the second is it's self-government and also the educated class. Like if you ask government if you make these kind of demands, so then one of the first answer that will pop up to your face is that we need to improve our economy because we are more vulnerable to climate change because we are poor. So if we keep divesting from those industries are what makes up our huge parts of our economy. But so those solutions doesn't really work here. And secondly, there are lots of paradox that kind of intersect with each other. But like for example, the thing with economy. So we have most of our economy is based on agriculture. 70% of Afghans work in the agriculture field, and pretty much 40% of the workforce is employed by agriculture, and it makes up a huge percent of our GDP. But that section, that whole industry, is very much disadvantaged and it's very much vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. We have got seasonal floods, we have got cyclical floods, we have got a significant reduction in our crops and other other ways, means of income that our country had from agriculture. So I would definitely say that that climate change is making it hard for cities like Kabul to develop. And one of the reasons of that is that there's more that the developed world contribute to the climate change, and that makes it hard for us to kind of catch up with the economic development, so that we are enough stable and enough powerful to make decisions like the developed world, to save ourselves or to adapt to the impacts of climate change. So I would say that's pretty much I wanted to say.
I think it's a brilliant start, Nasratullah. Thank you. And I don't think you have anything to apologize for being 18. In fact, I think it's incredibly inspiring that an 18-year-old has the clarity and the capacity to articulate in the manner that you do. And people like you are one of the reasons why older people like me are excited about the future of this region. Dr. Samanta, maybe I'll come to you. It's a really interesting. It's a really interesting formulation. This is what I've been hearing since Rio in 1992, right? That basically the developing world and poorer countries, poorer cities are saying, listen, please don't tell us about environmental sustainability and climate change. We'll get to that, but first we have to grow. First, we have to have black smoke coming from chimneys and really tall buildings and fossil fuel usage on the cheap that allows us to grow. And once we've grown, then we can get to everything that's happening on climate change and the things that the French and the Americans and the Brits care about. What is your experience in India of this argument, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, thank you for bringing me here. It's actually in India, yes, although we are not highly urbanized, only 30% of living in cities, and still we are fighting for being more and more urban, and urban growth is taking place at a very high rate. And the thing is, when we think about the climate change, actually I was reading when you invited me to talk here or to take part in this roundtable, I was reading the climate change action plan document of India. There are very clearly spelled out 8 missions. And among these 8 missions, I was looking for, is there anything which is talking about cities? And sorry to say that I didn't find anything specifically on cities. Although definitely if it is talking about solar mission, it is talking about Green India mission, if it is talking about water mission, etc., then definitely it will consider rural and urban both. But there is nothing specific on the cities. And for India, we problematic state because we have a very long coastal line, and along that coastal line we have a number of cities, and not only that we have Calcutta, Chennai, Mumbai, the Surat, the big cities, but also we have almost out of 10 cities, 1 is in coastal areas. There are many small cities also. And if we look at the climate change situation, we are not sure that, but there is no doubt if we consider that more and more cyclones, like as we see that Amphan this year recently happened in affecting Calcutta and Bengal Delta. And also funny last year in Odisha coast, and this year also. The most interesting thing is when Nisargo came to Mumbai, then in BBC it was reporting that the first time in Mumbai it is a cyclone. And it was reminding me that Amitav Ghosh's book, The Great Derangement, where Amitav Ghosh was telling us that yes, we know that the Bay of Bengal and the eastern coastal cities are more prone to cyclone, but the western coast we cannot guarantee because climate change is characterized by unpredictability and the incidents which probably will occur, which we have never seen before. So maybe, although it is said that between 1891 and 2018, Arabian Sea, in the Arab Bay of Bengal, it was 520 cyclone happened, and in Arabian Sea it was 126. But we don't know that climate change can also change every pattern of even the extreme events. So it can happen more and more in the Arabian Sea as well. And if it happens, then the city like it is already listed that second highest risk city following the climate change norms around the world. So taking all cities, and Calcutta probably is in 7th or 8th position. And Mumbai, it is already physically very, very vulnerable location, huge causeways, it was almost island, and now it has grown as a big, huge, densely populated cities. And if it happens that more climate events and flooding is very common to Mumbai, and also we know that Chennai was not habituated with the flooding, but 2-3 years before it has happened that flooding has become a big issue in Chennai, that the whole airport and the whole city was under lockdown because of that flooding. So this climate change is telling us that more and more events will come up which we are not happening before, and that preparedness probably, I'm not sure that we are looking after that preparedness. We have the disaster management plan for each state and central government as well, which is really backed up by the legal policies or legal planning. But climate change, yes, I would say that we are probably not prioritizing to save our cities from climate change, specifically which are located in the coastal areas. So I think we are really in a problematic state. We don't know how to handle the climate change situation, especially the water, even the scarcity of water. Most of the cities are water scarce already, and filling up of ponds and freshwater bodies are very rampant due to real estate development and other things, and which is destroying the even other sources, what we can call that surface water. So surface water is also under crisis. And in places like, if I talk about Chennai, then we have overexploited the groundwater, and salinization of the groundwater has already taken place. So these crises are also becoming very, very significantly important in the coastal cities, and rapid onset of any kind of extreme events can happen. It can be flooding. And if you look at like that in Rajasthan, Jaipur, it was heavily flooded this year. Yeah. It was probably not common to see Jaipur under a heavy flood. So yeah. I think that climate change is making the weather more unpredictable, more unusual, and it is becoming more and more difficult that which way we will prepare ourselves. So it's more challenging, I see, and probably we need a long-term vision to save our cities, otherwise it will be a problematic situation.
Thanks so much, Dr. Samanta. That's a great overview of what the state of play is in India. Rizwan, I want to come to you. You work in the Middle East, and particularly in the UAE. And for so many of us in this region, Dubai really represents kind of the ultimate, the ultimate in urban planning and design, especially from an infrastructure perspective. But we've seen, whether it's Jeddah or it's other cities in the Middle East, that when all of a sudden it's rained, it's caused quite a conundrum for those cities. The idea of water flowing. In fact, there was at least one meme that was using images from Jeddah and from Dubai over the past few years to kind of give comfort and succor to Karachiites. I don't think it helped in any way. But if a place like Dubai, with all the resources and all the planning that's gone into it, sometimes struggles with these issues, what hope do we legitimately have in India or Pakistan or Afghanistan, where resources are much more constrained and where the growth of the population is so fast? How do we actually deal with this? Is there a formula for this, Rizwan?
Okay, thank you, Musharraf, and thanks for setting up this wonderful, diverse panel, and I'm really enjoying it. Okay, so starting from GCC, I'm glad you mentioned Jeddah, because when I moved from Karachi to Saudi Arabia, actually my first project was related to strategic drainage, and that happened because of that Jeddah flooding, because they actually encroached the wadis. Here we called it Nala, and they called it Wadi. So they did some development over wadis, and they kind of ignored the rain pattern or this surprise rain what used to happen here, which is not the normal here. So the urban flooding happened in Jeddah. So to avoid that in Riyadh city, because it started raining in this last decade or this frequently in these cities. So we did a strategic drainage project here, and I have some like slide I would like to share it with you as well. That they build some sort of like storage drainage or sort of retention cells to retain that water, because the system what is built already there is not capable of taking this additional rainwater or the more influx what is coming. So they added the storage in the system, and when the original system or the previous system what they have will release the water and it will have capacity. So this new storage will release that water which is stored into the previous system. So, and in Dubai also 3-4 years back, we did a similar kind of exercise, and that was also a strategic nature of project, not the kind of conventional thing. But the size of these projects, you know, this region is famous for the kind of like magnitude of their projects and the size of these projects, they are huge. So, okay, I'll move on regarding cities in South Asia like Pakistan or Bangladesh or India. So you mentioned that we lack in resources, but I think the lack of financial resource is a reality. But I kind of see like more issue towards the human resource, how we are managing this thing. And because I continuously interact with the people who, especially who are dealing this infrastructure stuff in Karachi, when I talk to them, so I see the problem in their understanding, how they conceive the things and how they are dealing with it. And normally, I mean, we bash the politicians that they are bad or they don't want to do right things. But with the time, I realized that the people who are politicians are just fed by the bureaucrats and the secretaries and all these people. They are the real guys who are working on the back end. So if you allow me, can I share can I share my screen, Musharraf?
Gee, of course, please go ahead,
Rizwan. So if you are like working in for urban infrastructure project, because I mostly work in design side. So if I have to do a modeling for a city, like if I have to model a Karachi city and do its transport planning. So the thing I would like to start from here. 1 second, please. Okay. Can you guys see my? Can you guys see my screen?
Not yet, but I think you're almost there because we all moved to the side. So you're going to have to try again, or you can share your slides with our producer who can make them appear if it doesn't
Still
work.
Not there?
No, it's not. It's not on the screen. Oh,
okay,
I think it's great.
It's there.
Yeah,
okay.
It is there now. Yes.
Okay, so the problem with the Karachi is, the first thing what I see is the population. There is a lot of debate. I worked on urban transport master plan, which was developed in 2010 to 12 for 2 years under JICA funds, and was done by KMC and Sindh government. So that time used to consider Karachi population in 2010 almost 19 million. And we were forecasting it will be around 27 million in 2020, and in 2030 it will be 31 million. When in 2017 they did the census and they said that no, Karachi population is 15 million. And if you see the trend of growth in other cities, like let's say for capital cities, Lahore, Peshawar and Islamabad, their annual growth rate is around 4%, and their population was almost double in 20 years, because census happened after 20 years. But in Karachi, the annual growth rate is even less than 2.5%. So now denying the right of one person is serious issue. And you are like, I'm not saying it will be like 2.25 million now, or some even are saying it's 30 million or it's 15 million. But this is the first thing which we need to sort, that we need to fix this thing. Otherwise, we cannot go ahead, especially for Karachi. And this is important in all the contexts, because without this thing, in any field, any sector you go, you cannot go ahead. Then what sort of challenge we are dealing with, especially in Karachi right now, it's number 11th city population wise. But if we like try to count it correctly and like try to calibrate the population, maybe it's the 5th or 4th highest city in the world population wise. And if you see the countries globally, so let's say if it's 25 million today, it's the 55th country population wise. So it's more than, I guess, Australia, Netherlands. So there are some countries. So it's a big number, and the complexity is on the highest side. So you are not dealing with a small town or something. And the development framework, if you see, vision need to be set by the people whose job is to provide vision, that how your city is going to be, and the policymakers. Then planning is the job of different people. Then that planning, when it is converted into the projects, those projects need to be designed, and then those design need to be built, and that infrastructure or that sort of stuff is need to be operated. All these are very professional stuff. And unfortunately, the way in Karachi or in Pakistan cities we are doing, we all know what's happening out there. So these are like a few points I'll quickly go through. So the current approach is bureaucratic approach. I'll give you a few examples. Like one time I was reading the news that the highest government official is asking the commissioner of the city that how to solve the traffic problems, and the guys to whom he's asking, the other technical staff what he has, I know they are all construction guys. So you are asking wrong people the wrong question. So the answer is reforms, reforms, and reforms. And we need a strictly professional breakup for the roles and the responsibility in the public sector to address these issues. Otherwise, we cannot solve this mystery forever unless we sort this thing. And we are more relying on journalists, but we need professional people who exactly know what is the issue and how to solve these issues, and have previous similar experiences globally to deal with such issues. And like Pakistani graduates, I work here. I've seen like hundreds of graduates, not only here in Australia, in UK, in Canada, in US. They are working everywhere, and some of them are really doing a great job, and they are leading this process. So if these guys who are graduates of NAT and UET and other universities, if they can work a great job in other countries, I mean, they should be doing similar job in Pakistan. But if you are working in Pakistan, unfortunately, you are not groomed in such a way that you are able to handle these complex urban issues. That is the problem in our system, that professionals who are working here are not getting the exact opportunity or kind of exposure or platform where they can like deal with these complex issues, because they are already decided, you know how the things work in the government office, that people who don't have specific qualifications, who are generalized people, they decide stuff, and just things go on.
Rizwan, that's a really helpful start, and I want to come back, and especially on transportation networks, I want to come back to you. But I also want to include Marvi, Mazhar in this discussion. Marvi, this is the second sort of Karachi-inspired discussion we're having. We had one last week as well that was more focused on Karachi. Today, I wanted to deal with the region as well. It seems to me there's some degree of repetitiveness, but there's three things that are inescapable, right? I mean, the first is climate change itself. It's not within our control. But increasingly, it seems, if we take what Rizwan said, that we don't have the right people working on cities. And so that's kind of a human resource problem. It seems to me that even if you had all the right people, and suppose we had all the money in the world, would it be incorrect to posit that even if you had all the right people in the world and all the money in the world, because of climate change and because cities especially in this region, but even globally, were designed in a completely different era. That actually the foundational problem is a design problem. And if that's the case, then what is that design problem? Just talk us through the element of design when we think of this. And of course, we're not talking about lines and squares and boxes. We're really talking about design from a kind of 40,000-foot view.
Right.
Marvi.
Thanks, Musharraf. So I really like your question, what you've asked me. It's very hypothetical and conceptual. And for Karachi, I would say the complexity starts from a very simple notion, which is that it's a fractured city. And Pakistan's general idea of development is a little bit, needs to be analyzed in a way that do we really need in South Asia development, or that's a secondary aspect that we need preservation first? What's there and that needs to be understood, and then what needs to be done later on becomes into the stage factor. I'm constantly questioning in the cities. I'm going to really focus on Karachi because that's where my expertise lies and that's where most of the years of my practice has been focused into. Understanding Karachi has always been a tough section, because if you focus on certain part, the other areas are completely neglected. And then when you make a connection, then it becomes all about infrastructure. So, so on a general idea, design aspect only can be implemented once you have the mapping sorted. Karachi lacks daily mapping. It does not have whatever there are, like I can generalize it by saying there are 3 types of maps in Karachi. One is which was left by the colonial era. The second one is from a governmental section which was 1947 onwards, and it lasted till 70s. We don't have standardized good maps of daily basis. So that's why we don't know what the X-ray of the city is. We don't know what the gut is like. You make a flyover, you make an underpass, suddenly you realize the pipelines are missing. So there's a constantly digging factor happening in the city. And by digging, I just don't mean by flyovers and underpasses. I mean this constant construction, concretization of the city, which is a huge problem. You've made the city so non-porous that today where we are is because of the reason, because you haven't really sectorized and said, okay, this is going to be the ratio of the open space versus the pavement. We have constantly been just thinking about cementing, either higher or expanding. So right now, for me, what's very mind-boggling and interesting is that the city is divided into six centers. And just for a layman's sake, wherever there is a large mall in the city, that becomes the area of focus. So if you start following Dolman Mall, for instance, in the city, you will exactly know that the city center of that area is focusing, and it's very introverted rather than expanding. So imagine the population of that zone. So it's a very complex part, and design cannot play a role unless and until you have the mapping sorted, which is the foundation of any city.
Sorry, Marvi, could you repeat that last sentence? I seem to have blanked on that.
I said that you cannot move forward in a design aspect unless and until your mapping is sorted, and that can lead into some kind of dialogue with other departments. Like Rizwan mentioned that it's a management issue, I would say it's the starting conversation which of the city, how do you look into a city is the problem here. And that's only because we don't have the blueprint. We invest too much into master planning and say 2020 plan, or we're going to say 2025 plan. We don't need master plan. All we need is a daily mapping of your neighborhood. So coming back into a very small cell.
So I think that's an interesting topic. One of the juxtapositions I used, Dr. Samanta, just to bring the conversation back to you, I believe it was the 74th or perhaps the 72nd Amendment to the Indian Constitution that specified urban governance as a constitutional sort of value or norm. And you know what Marvi is really talking about is essentially subsidiarity, that if you're not able to map a city at the neighborhood level, how do you then organize and plan at the city level? And then how does the city move forward? I think there's probably a lot of key distinctions in terms of urban governance. But I've always seen India as being far ahead of Pakistan, for example, in recognizing the need for urban governance as a specific area that deserves its own constitutional treatment. Did the constitutional amendment in India change the way in which cities are organized and understood, especially perhaps from a mapping perspective and a planning perspective, in the way that Marvi and Rizwan were referring to?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's a really good question in case of climate change and how to cope with the situation. Yeah, India actually is doing very well in case of 74th constitutional amendment. Actually talks about urban governance, and it specified the people's action, more and more participation in the governance process. And I'm working on that particular issue for a long time, although it is not linked to climate change, it is linked to small cities in Eastern India. The thing is, when we talk about the governance, then we have done a lot of things like regular kind of election and participation of the elected members in the process, rather than, so chairperson might be the more powerful than the executive officer. But in cases when we think about the financial devolution, then we got stuck. Actually, the thing is, the cities, in case of the power to collect money to run their cities, it is not possible for smaller cities because they don't have much commercial base. And the bigger cities like Mumbai and Calcutta, they're rich in revenue collection, revenue generation, etc. But if we look at the how and India, the situation is this urban governance and the cities are under state rules and regulations. It is not directly under the center. And there are certain kind of schemes which are from the central government, and that covers each and every cities in most cases. Like earlier we had JNNURM, and now we have Amrut kind of projects. But these are specific projects, and these are not covering all cities in India. So the thing is, now when I talk about the allocation which is coming from the state government to the cities, and there is a big role of political economy, that which city will receive more money. It depends on the city is run by which kind of political parties and which party is at the state assembly. And so depending on that, this dependence on state government, even if they are democratically elected body, they can generate revenue to some extent and other things. But still, if we look at the economy of the city and the financial management of the city, each and every city, starting from a big one to a small one, they're heavily dependent on the government grant. And here lies the problem, that government control, state government control on these cities are also very, very significantly high. And another problem of these kinds of city governance, because what we prefer to call like infrastructure development, city government doesn't have any role in infrastructure development. These are lying under like, PWD, Public Works Department, or Electricity Department, or somewhere else. So infrastructure is not directly under the city government. But in case of big cities like Mumbai and Calcutta, yes, if they have a development authority kind of. Otherwise, in other cities, the infrastructure is basically developed by the line departments, which is specifically called the specific departments which are responsible for those kinds of work. Like if it is a flyover, then definitely it will be under the PWD kind of institution, not under the city government. So still we can see that, okay, in India, we are relatively better in democratic participation of people in urban governance, and it is relatively better, but still in case of financial devolution, we are not yet much ahead. And that is a problematic situation for us.
Sure.
Where the money will come? So
sure.
at each and every step, they have to depend on the state government grant. So
yeah,
they cannot have if their financial base is not strong enough, they cannot generate enough fund independently, then it becomes a problematic situation.
So I guess the question,
it helps.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying and I understand. I guess the question then, Dr. Samanta, becomes whether or not the system, whether it's India or any of these other countries, whether, given that the division of responsibilities and the concept of subsidiarity is contested, and whether it's federal or national versus city or state or province, these debates are present in all countries. I'll just come to you in a moment, Nasratullah, and ask you about how that debate takes place in Afghanistan. But just sticking to Dr. Samanta for a moment, maybe talk a little bit about what that means for climate change adaptation. If so much of the functionality of what happens in a city is dependent across, 3 different tiers of governance, even with India having a slightly better track record in terms of democratic participation, what does it mean for climate change adaptability when the contest between the center and in your case, the state, in our case, the provinces, and the actual city is as pronounced as it seems to be in all of our countries?
Yeah, the cities, if we consider the climate change situation, so if we look at whether the municipal governments or municipal corporations like Calcutta and Mumbai, if we take the case, they still do not have any specific climate change mitigation plan or disaster management plan. So it is still under the state government. And then the cities themselves, they don't have an independent system or planning for climate change or disaster management yet. So it is still at the level of state government, not below. So cities are still not in a position to develop their own climate change plan or their disaster management plan. So there is still a gap, I think, in between.
Yeah, I suspected as much. And of course, in Pakistan, we have a federal ministry that looks at climate change. I don't think we have a viable provincial or urban governance response to climate change. Nasratullah, what is the situation in Afghanistan? And talk to me a little bit, or to all of the viewers and the panelists, talk to us a little bit about the degree to which at the level beyond the national conversation, whether there's any room or any space for young Afghans to influence the conversation around climate change and the way it affects cities, not just Kabul, but Jalalabad, Kandahar, Mazhar Sharif, and I suppose, and Helmand. What is the conversation about urbanization there looking like vis-a-vis youth participation in particular?
Oh gosh, it was so nice listening to all of you. At some point I was so focused that I almost forgot. I'm also expected to say something. But yeah, coming back to your question, so there is I can tell you a little story. So in the beginning of this discussion, you've talked about how I was part of the United Nations Youth Climate Summit. But in fact, I was one of the very few climate activists from these regions, South Asia, Middle East, or all conflict zone. And I remember back in the Bangkok embassy, I was denied a visa, and then it became a news. So I came back to my hometown after graduation, and then I went to my old village, which I was not able to go there like for about 5 years. So I met my cousin, my uncle. He's a very old man. So he was like, I saw him somewhere on Al Jazeera, and he was more proud of seeing me in Al Jazeera rather than me being a climate activist. So he was like, what was the story? And I said, oh, it was an advocacy sort of a project for climate change. And he was like, what is climate change? And then I was like, well, it was hard to explain, but it's it's the Earth is becoming more. The Earth, yeah, the climate of the Earth is warming, and it makes us all vulnerable to its impacts, and the impacts are very heavy. And he kind of laughed, and he was like, I mean, he's not educated, so most of his life he spent in agriculture, and he was like, well, don't touch upon God's word. And he laughed, and then I went inside his house, and then I saw this like this magical piece of the traditional engineering, which was 100% sustainable. There was a little stream of the water coming inside his house, and they had like this little turbine down there. They dug the ground, and that was how they were making themselves cool down in the summer. So there, I kind of found a shock. So I was like, this guy who knows nothing about climate change, who don't even believe in sustainability, is literally more sustainable than my environmental science teacher or most of my climate activist fellows, because we fly and we do own technology, and we have been asked about this actually in so many. So I was kind of I was asked like how I own a phone, and how these kind of like, you know, how the shaming that happens for the climate activists. So in Afghanistan, about the youth participation and their involvement with the climate change, there's a huge gap, and there's a huge problem of the public awareness, more education. Most of the people do not possess sufficient knowledge to be aware of what is to come from climate change to them, and what is climate change and how it affects their daily life. And that problem kind of leads to a domino of other problems, which allows the government and other corporations and construction company to act freely, entirely free upon their interest. And yeah, it's not only Kabul, of course. We've got lots of other problems. Let's say in Jalalabad, you mentioned. So in Jalalabad, only 30% of the people, pretty much unlike the rest of Afghanistan, have access to electricity. It's a huge problem. So in that problem, so it's again like a domino that our government cannot build electricity dams and other infrastructure projects on the Kunar River Basin or Kabul River Basin that flows into Pakistan, because of the lack of the political framework and friendship between these two countries, and that affects the rest of the population. However, there's a huge knowledge gap that people do not know how those impact or consequences, dominoes, connect and impact their life. And there was always one question that always struck me was, we live in a profit-driven world. We live in an era of the capitalist greed. So I was always wondering how can we make this system, how can we take advantage of this system to make people, how can we turn this system into our benefit in terms of climate change? And then there was this huge debate that I was invited to, and then some of the people suggested that we need to privatize the construction sector in major cities like Kabul and Jalalabad or Kandahar, so that people kind of so it's a customer-driven world, let's say, so that the customer demands more sustainable products or means of living or other sort of construction products, so that then the corporates will act upon those customer needs, because that's what they're for. But then but the big problem with that was that there is not enough education. Again, going back to the first point, that for people to make such demands, because you will rather want a luxury house to live in, rather than to have a sustainable house. So that's one of the reasons I'm a climate activist and involved in this work, is to raise awareness, because I believe raising awareness can be one of the effective strategy to kind of break the coffers of the wealthy oil giants and the fossil fuel industry giants, and take some of their wealth and spread it around local empowerment against the impacts of climate change. Youth involvement is not it's inadequate in Afghan realm of this climate negotiation. And the first thing is that even though it should be, because the older generation kind of have this optimism bias and younger generation do not. But again, the problem kind of backs and forth to the problem of education and awareness, because most of the young generation themselves do not know much about this issue in Afghanistan, and even if those do, are not given a seat on the table of talk or decision making.
I suspect that's. I mean, thanks for highlighting that. I suspect that Afghans are not alone, young Afghans, in terms of the awareness deficit. But Marvi, I want to maybe turn this question to you, because I suspect that even if we had 100% awareness, some of the ways in which incentives are designed and structured in a city like Karachi would make it impossible for better climate change outcomes, whether it's the SCBA and kind of building regulations and how profit-driven, both the regulations themselves and the very weak or compromised enforcement of those are, or it's the attention, the degree of attention to detail in larger infrastructure projects. And we have 2 or 3 now big infrastructure projects that have been announced as part of the Karachi Transformational Plan. In all of these, I suspect, given for a number of reasons, and maybe you can tell us what those reasons are, but climate change doesn't seem to be either a publicly demanded issue that is catered for or a supply side driven issue. So is it not the case that even with a huge amount of investment, 1,100 billion rupees, or about $6.5 billion that's going to go into Karachi over the next 3 years, that so much of that investment might be designed for the 1980s or the 70s rather than for the 2020s and 2030s vis-a-vis climate change? And is awareness alone going to be enough of a fillip to ready Karachi's infrastructure for the kind of climate change challenges that might be coming down the line, given what Dr. Samanta has articulated in terms of some of the coastal cities in India and the challenges they faced? Marvi? You'll just need to unmute before you speak, Marvi. We've missed what you were saying.
Thank you so much, Musharraf, for the question. I completely forgot that I had to unmute each time. So again, the conversation of climate change, I feel, has either been on a very superficial level, has been discussed around the public diaspora, or I feel it's become like a competition. So if federal is doing 1 billion tree campaign, then the provincial government needs to do something equivalent to that, not understanding that that also requires some strategy. It just cannot be done, and it won't bring a change. Where is a sustainable plan for that? Who is monitoring those trees? So that's a example, right? But if I have to talk about the coastal region, and especially with Karachi, now look at what has happened to the city. This constant creation and claiming of land. We are focusing so much on land reclamation, and we are taking our construction all the way to the edge. I study Mumbai very closely because I feel like the at least for the mapping aspect, how do they deal with their coastal front? Again, comparison is what one can learn from, right? So Chowpatty in Mumbai has given a back front, like there's a setback of at least 100 feet away from the coastal belt. And that's the first phase of the setback. And then the construction is even more further away. What we have done is we've allocated plots right till the edge, selling land to its bits, not understanding that what will be the reaction of the sea level, water level, and that's evident right now in these rains, in this particular monsoon. We've seen this, and I've been talking about it since 2014 when the inner city was being affected. Now your outer edge is being affected. So we have this amazing 10 years of case study between the inner and the outer region. And so climate change, again, I mean, it can't just be a policy. It needs to be porous. It needs to go down to the education level. It needs to be part of a bylaw. When you make a house, you have to, just the way how you give a structural system of saying that this is going to be your service area and this is the setback that you need to leave as open space. But what happens in that open space, we need to start defining that. So really coming down to nexus of how the street is going to look like in comparison to the neighborhood, and how the neighborhood will then react to the zoning or the district. What we do is we've divided the city into these 6 or 7 districts, and we think that that's the way forward. But I feel it needs to go down to, again, to a street level and see that if there are 15 houses, then the ratio of 15 houses versus of that neighborhood, a park needs to be there. And that park just does not need to be a jogging park, but it needs to be an intelligent park and not just an urban forest. So, you know, we really wrap ourselves into trending terminology, and we get really hyped up and we start saying, okay, let's start urban forest. And then that becomes a trickling a strategy till the government, you know, somebody like a civil society member will start something and then it will be adopted by the government. So I feel this kind of these kind of strategies only one notices in South Asia, where the complexity of the fractured city and the other things kind of complicate the real issue. And if we are talking about climate change, then we need to talk about the policy and the implementation in a particular area and then divide it into a city level.
So I hear you loud and clear, Marvi, because I think in both sort of, you know, your comments, you've really clearly articulated this idea of the street, right? And the granularity that we need in terms of planning and governance writ large. My view, you know, based on, you know, being the least of the experts in this group, is that we simply don't have the capacity at that granular level. You know, if we were to staff, if Rizwan had a magic wand to staff every street in Karachi or Mumbai or Kolkata with, you know, an urban expert or an engineer or an architect to do that, we would run out of people, because, you know, these are very large cities. So is there a missing element here in terms of technology? Why hasn't government, like, again, Karachi being the kind of hot topic right now, why hasn't technology been a bigger part of, you know, the set of solutions that people are talking about in terms of mapping the street level? Because I just don't think we have either the governance mechanisms or the people to do it.
Musharraf, we need to separate two things, at least from the technology part that you've mentioned, and it's very apt. But do you realize that how much surveillance and security is constantly thrown upon when you have to simply map a little space? It just corresponds to that when they don't even know that the GIS mapping or the satellite images are available. So why is there a threat with drone imagery and start taking photographic images and use technology for that? So this is a government insecurity that we need to start talking about.
I guess the wider question, and I guess you've answered it, right, is that forget about private actors or, you know, even, I would say, even nonprofits doing this. I mean, the more important question is, why isn't government doing it itself? And I suppose at one level, you know, it'll be easy for various governments to blame it on a different tier of government. But surely this is one of the big gaps in urban governance, is it not, Marvi?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it seems like mapping has become like a private entity. Everybody, like, there are certain sectors. Dawn is doing interesting mapping, but it's their private section. You cannot ask for it. There's a very bureaucratic system attached to it. Then other universities and institutions are mapping. For instance, heritage, for they're monitoring, but it comes under Antiquity Department of Heritage in Sindh government. So, you know, we see that everyone is doing their work in silos, but we are not collaborating and we're not making our information public, which is mind-boggling. That how will you fix a city then when you don't share data? And that's the foundation of any city conversation.
Sure, Rizwan, I want to you know, bring this. Sorry.
I think Dr. Samanta wanted to say something.
Yeah, just to continue this conversation. Can I say something?
Of course, please, Dr. Samanta.
Yeah, actually, following her comment, I was just thinking, like, in India, cities starting from very small to very big, everywhere we have this GIS mapping kind of thing. So that has become part of the governance process, and we have this GIS map even for a small city of 100,000 population, or maybe a very big city like Mumbai and Calcutta, and it is being done by the government itself. But to my mind, there is another side of the story of these kinds of mapping, because when the government, the city government is having a very detailed mapping of the area, entire city, then they also decide, okay, everybody is looking after the land these days, and the city government itself, because real estate has become a big issue. Big corporate real estates are looking after the land. So when there is a big and very illustrated maps available with this city government, they can also think about lucrative area for investment kind of thing. So that mapping has another story, which is sometimes not facilitating, rather than appropriating lands from other uses into and bringing into the real estate and big gated community development, which is happening in Mumbai, in Delhi, and many other cities, in big cities in India. So that was just my little comment. I'm sorry for
No, don't be sorry, Dr. Samanta. In fact, I think that you'll find as you talk to more and more Pakistanis that that's not something that's exclusive to India. As Marvi just mentioned, we've been carving out plots on the beach essentially, and many of which are going to be consumed by the sea. Because the sea is not interested in profits in the way that people and politicians and bureaucrats often are. Rizwan, I want to bring the conversation to you, and we also have a question, actually a couple of questions that I want to pose to you, and then maybe I'll bring another question back to you, Dr. Samanta, and later to you, Marvi and Nasratullah. Rizwan, the question I have is from a gentleman named Daniel Adam Khan, and he's asking, our cities are designed for cars instead of people. Would the panelists agree that new urbanism principles can minimize climate change impacts by reforming how we live, move, and govern cities? And I want to just say, before you answer that question, that this is a question that I would have, if I was more dictatorial, I would have just deleted, because I think that there's too much this new age pedestrianism. I think that a developing country like Pakistan and developing cities like Lahore and Karachi and Quetta and Gujranwala, more highways, more roads, and more cars. Now, the cars should be electronic vehicles rather than gas guzzlers. But why should the imposition of like village life start with a country like Pakistan or India or Afghanistan? Why shouldn't we aspire to more roads, Rizwan? You'll have to unmute before you start speaking. Thanks.
Okay. That's because I would absolutely agree with Marvi what she said, that we'll go with the events. One event happen, we all run after that. And I'm part of the government in the past myself. So all the things just go with the what mayor want that day or what secretary Saab want that day or this week. And this is the way things go on. I also agree that master plans are not very much relevant in these days. But planning process is very important. You cannot run the cities without planning. So I had a chance with Dr. Nadeem Haq to write about urban transport policy in Pakistan. And this is the answer of the question that Daniel asked, that how should be the urban transport in Pakistan? And you know that Dr. Nadeem is very much in promoting the idea that cities should be engine of growth. So for that idea, the core thing should be that cities should provide equal opportunity to all segments of society, which we are not doing right now. So if you have a car, you can go anywhere right now in Pakistan cities, either Islamabad, Lahore, Karachi. Some of the cities have some mass transit projects in past 5 years, but that also are not perfect. So in our policy, what we suggested that cities should adopt the hierarchy that they should prioritize the walking moment as the most prioritized moment, then cycling. I'll come to cycling a bit more, and then public transport, which is the buses. And my assessment is that the buses are the most neglected area in urban transport in Pakistan, because if you go 20 years back, Karachi was very much accessible by buses if you want to go anywhere, but that's not the case today. And the last thing is the car, and you have to make sure that you are discouraging to the car to maximum extent. And there are many ways you can discourage the cars, like you have to make your land use which support shorter trip lengths. So shorter your trip length will be, it's more easier to adopt for the sustainable modes. You need to charge the car usage, like we have e-tolls in most of the cities in the world. And then you need to price your charging. I was really surprised when I see Blue Area Islamabad has free parking. So that's insane for me. And the last thing is we have many mass transit facilities in Pakistan. Lahore has almost 2 now, Peshawar has 1, Isnad has 1, Karachi will have few. So there is a concept called transit oriented development. So what you do there, that you grow vertically around the stations, around 300-400 meter around the station. So most of the people have access to the transit facility. So their reliance on the car is discouraged, and they are encouraged to use the public transport. And about cycling and walking, some people may say that our weather don't suit like European countries, that we cannot walk much and we cannot cycle much. In my personal experience, in Dubai, I designed myself 100 kilometer of cycle track, and my current project is I have to design cycle track which will cover whole Abu Dhabi city, and the total length of cycle track is around 200 kilometer. Will cover all the city, and this 200 kilometer is on the both sides of the road, so total will be around 400 kilometer. So if Abu Dhabi with this weather can have cycle track which will provide access to the whole city, why not Islamabad, why not Lahore, why not Karachi? And if you see the global mode distribution in the cities like Istanbul, Jakarta, and maybe similar cities, so 70 to 80%, or even in some cities up to 90% trips are happening with either walking, cycling, or public transport. But in our case, it's opposite. Most of the trips are happening by motorbikes, and it's like 74-75% registration of the total vehicle is only motorbike. So we are killing our environment with this bad transport policy and planning. And that is the case. And for that, you need to bring in the right people who understand the whole situation, who understand the development process, and who can collaborate in different sectors of the development. And unless you don't bring those people, for that, either you bring the global funds, like there are many names, I don't want to name any. So there is a perception they will charge more, but that's not the case. The value what they will bring in, that will be really useful. And then once you learn from 1 or 2 projects from those funds, you can do it on your own. And the last thing is overseas Pakistani who have that skill, what they have achieved in different countries. If there are 100 people, I'm not saying bring all 100, but 2-3 you can target few any person who have the right skill, and you should try this at least. Otherwise, I don't see any way how we can improve this and how we can deal with urban issues.
I think, a lot of people... Sorry, Marvi, please go ahead.
Sorry, Musharraf. I just wanted to add something to Rizwan's thought. I think it was very interesting what he just said. Just to add this part that, we're always talking about carbon footprint and carbon emission. This is all part of the, linkage to, climate change, if we are really discussing and we're talking about the larger idea. Now, just think about the leasing system of the cars in the city. It's insane. Anybody can lease out a car, and the proportions, we don't talk about that how many cars have been distributed out into per person category. In the COVID time, I remember like 6 months in a year, I teach at a university. And the first exercise that I had given them during the COVID time was what changes did they bring in their own personal space. And it was very interesting to hear from people living in apartments that they said that we had to empty out, downsize our living standards, and to empty out the gallery spaces just to sit outside, because that was the only moment of space that we had to contradict and say, do we really need a storage and make it into a do chatti in a gallery space, or we need to sit outside and actually breathe out and take a time off? So this also relates to an interesting conversation that what kind of apartment designs and vertical structures are we building where the people are completely confined into this cell form and they need to work out some solutions in order to spend that time period of luxury. So these are all connected queries if we really have to talk about the urban design element and then the structure of human living.
I think it's a brilliant point, Marvi. I'm glad you brought it up. We have another question from somebody called Quantized 101, which is a fantastic name, and all people thinking of baptizing new children should consider it. But it's a good question, and so it deserves airing out. The question is, what scale of preventive measures regarding climate will save a country? And I think really what the questioner is asking is, even if one country does everything right, isn't the kind of interdependence between countries and the influence that other countries have on another country's environment going to negate those policies? I don't know who wants to take that, but maybe perhaps Dr. Samanta, you could talk a little bit about whether globalization and interdependence and trade between countries, especially in terms of coastal cities, if somebody else is polluting the Arabian Sea in city X, and the price might be being paid by somebody in city Y. So how do you prevent, or how do you get around the interdependence that globalization and the environment at large create between countries and between cities? You'll have to unmute before you speak, Dr. Samanta. Dr. Samanta, you haven't unmuted. You're on mute. You have to there you go.
Okay. Yeah. So yes, I'm happy to answer this question, because it is sometimes not that particular country's incident or the happening from which the country is suffering. Like, we have, like all Asian countries, the neighboring countries, we have sharing of river water. Like Bhutan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, all of us, we have kind of sharing of river water issue, and which is also becoming a more with the lesser and lesser water in the river. So it is becoming a severe crisis, and it is not always dependent on that particular country. It may be some other countries. And for coastal cities, yes, if there is a huge degree of pollution in the sea itself, and that pollution can be by any countries or any countries of the world or neighboring countries in particular. So it sometimes might not be, even if that country is perfectly doing everything, that cannot prevent. Like, I would also like to say that it is not about the countries, but what interesting thing happens every year in northern part of India, that the farmers in Punjab and Haryana, they burn the residues, crop residues in their farm, and that pollution comes to Delhi, and Delhi people suffer highly from that fog and smog, and it's a severe problem. Every year it happens. Like, so we see that, okay, and there is always a blame game between Delhi people and the Punjab and Haryana people, that they are burning residues, and these crop residues burning is polluting Delhi, because Delhi is already, but then again, another story is the Punjab and Haryana is not suffering that way. Delhi is suffering because Delhi is also heavily they're emitting greenhouse gases, the cars and etc. Many other, actually the cities are also the cities are highly energy consuming spaces, and therefore their contribution to the climate change is also very, very high. And on the contrary, again, if there is a climate change, and then it is coming again a very significant problem or disaster to a city. So it's a very, very complex situation. And what the idea the example which I brought in, that between Punjab and Haryana and Delhi, that can happen in between and Bangladesh, that can happen between India and Pakistan as well. So environment, especially when we talk about the pollution, if we talk about the climate change, if we talk about the changes in weather, it is not particularly affected by, like, we talk about in Asia, there is a brown clouds, and this brown clouds in Asia is not the effect of a particular country. It's the greenhouse gas emission of different countries bringing in together, and that might have a very big impact on the climate as well. And monsoon itself is already, monsoon is characterized by, even in our school text we have read that monsoon, the most significant character of monsoon is unpredictability. And now if you look at the behavioral pattern of monsoon, which is also changing at a faster rate because of the climate change. So practically, yes, Musharraf, we cannot just stick to that. This country, as a country, we are doing everything very fine, and we are not going to be affected by other kinds of problems. So we are living in a global situation and globally connected world. We are connected to each other, but and particularly the climate change issue is not a local issue. So even if we try to become very perfect in handling climate change, everything is not in one country's hand.
Absolutely.
I hope it is.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, Dr. Samanta. In fact, the other question we have kind of is a perfect segue. It's from Roshan Bukhari, and Roshan is asking, what potential do you see for a climate change-driven science diplomacy agenda? Now, Roshan is asking about for Pakistan, but really, Nasratullah, I wanted to actually pose this question to you. If you see what Dr. Samanta is saying, we've had this conversation in Pakistan about how the crop burning in Punjab and Haryana, not only are the Delhiites complaining, but the Lahoris are also complaining every year. And it's been part of the discourse here for many years. We know that there's upper riparian and lower riparian conversations between Afghans and Pakistanis in terms of how the rivers work. We know that underground water in the Punjab, East Punjab, and here in Pakistan, there's a competition for extracting water. So in so many ways, these climate change driven issues may become sources of conflict. And isn't it better to have spokespersons, especially like yourself, engage in, climate change diplomacy that helps solve these problems? I think it's a great question. You'll have to unmute your mic, Nasratullah.
Musharraf, it's a very important question. I've spent quite a lot of time on this, specifically Kabul River and how this actually fueled the conflict in Afghanistan. It is a disaster. It is beyond my thinking how much human loss this caused and how much instability it causes in Afghanistan, probably as well as in Pakistan, and how much and how this lack of political framework to solve this issue is affecting people in Nangarhar province. I mean, I live in eastern Afghanistan. I don't live in Kabul. It is very hot here. Not any less than Delhi. Not maybe a bit less, but not very much less than Peshawar or any of those provinces. I've seen people. I've seen kids dying from the severity of the weather, that it gets too hot, and then yet we have this huge river and this capacity of producing a lot of electricity, more than we need. We have this capacity of producing electricity that we can even export to our neighboring Pakistan, or even India. It is some expert view that I'm copying here, but at the same time, Afghan government can't build this. Even so, sometimes we have India jumping in, funding those projects, but we really don't. We kind of hesitate doing this because it's going to piss off our riparian country. And I think it's really saddened me why we make it so complicated, why we cannot agree on it, how we need very little of this climate diplomacy to solve this issue. the capacity of producing electricity is very high. I'm definitely like it's no doubt, zero doubt here that if we agree, if these two states with sort of claim to some historical and geographical and geological position of this river can agree, and it will benefit both countries. I've spent 1 year in my childhood living in KPK. I've seen people suffering from lack of electricity there. It was only like 3 to 4 hours electricity there. I mean, if we agree on this, if we agree on a political framework that allows us to go ahead and build some of our infrastructure on this river and use this water, I think it will benefit both of us. So I wanted actually to add a comment onto Samanta's comment on how the climate change is becoming a global issue. It's beyond our state sovereignty. It doesn't care about our state sovereignty and sort of different kind of claims that we made for different natural resources, and as well as some of the Mr. Rizwan's comments saying that we need to kind of opt for a more sustainable lifestyle. All right, I would definitely agree with this. However, let's say Afghanistan is pretty much similar with Pakistan. They have very low carbon footprint. Afghanistan has already a lower than 1 carbon footprint, while the United States has 48. An air condition in the beach of Florida or in the coast of Florida consume more electricity than an average Afghan in his entire life and his entire year. I kind of forgot this was entire life or it was entire year. So even if we opt to that kind of lifestyle, I don't think it will enable us to solve the climate issue overall. So, okay, it's a global issue. No, it's nobody's fault alone, but there is definitely some more responsible, some less responsible. The more responsible have to pay more, and the less responsible have to pay less. But today, it's the opposite. The less responsible are paying high, and the more responsible are not. So it's the idea of the whole idea of climate justice is revolving about this simple idea. Simplified even more, somebody, a pastoralist or a peasant in Afghanistan lose, let's say 20 of his livestock or sheep. There's a massive animal starvation because some multi-billionaire in the developed world, in America or Europe, is denying climate change, or is because it's because a billionaire wants to pump some more billions into his wealth coffer. So we need to change that one, and we need to fight for that one first. And I'm not gonna push off someone from a taxi in Kabul and tell him to use a bike, but I think I'll leave this guy in the taxi. We'll pull down somebody from his. It will open up the billions coffer of multi-billionaire from giant company, a fast food industry, and a developer, rather than to do that here. I think we need more investment. We need more economic development in this country so that we get to a position first that we can prevent the cause of climate change. I will ask this question: that why does the developing country, the poor country, has to go the way the developed world went? Like why they have to be unsustainable in doing all these things? And I think I strongly believe that no, the developing countries, the poor countries, are already using the fuel efficient technology. They are already not going the way the developed world went. We are already being considerate of the environmental impacts, but I think it would make sense that we are not too much focused on it, because we've already not made so much contribution. Even if it makes a little bit, it won't be as much as those in the developed world.
I think that's a really fantastic sort of dimension that you've added, Nasratullah. I do think that there is a rich-poor divide that fuels some of the urban challenges that all of our countries and cities face. We're just about approaching the close of play for this roundtable. I wanted to just go around and get maybe some final thoughts, starting with you, Rizwan. How do you, particularly from a transportation standpoint, it seems that there's a lot of common ground, but at the end of the day, profitability, profit making may often trump some of the concerns that you have. How do we tackle this, knowing that we don't have a magic wand? Rizwan? Could you please unmute before you speak?
You can hear me, I guess. Okay. The idea is, even if we, for a moment, keep aside climate change factors, we are not serious with the current situation. And the climate change, all the aspects of these, they are adding additional responsibility on our jobs. So we need to be more serious, and we need to be more professional that how we are dealing the things. And when it comes to urban affairs, you need to be on the top of the game. You exactly should know what you are doing. Your anticipation should be spot on. What are you anticipating? You may have some errors, whatever you are anticipating about the magnitude of error. But the thing is, the way system is running in Pakistan, we know bureaucratic system and who are the guys who are controlling all the things. We need to transform this into a professional system. I think that is going to help us. That's the way I see it.
Thanks, Rizwan. Marvi, final thoughts from you?
I mean, for me, the Global Climate Risk Index says that Pakistan is going to ranks at the 7th position among the most adversely affected countries. And that is something that is a really, like a red alert in understanding how the government is going to tackle or how the people are going to respond to it. But in between space is where I feel, before we even think about implementation, research is the most critical part. Researching constantly on a daily basis.
Thanks, Marvi.
City.
Sorry, I missed that last part because I think you blanked out. Just repeat that last sentence, Marvi, for the benefit of our audience.
I said that the research will automatically be linked to the demand and what the city really needs. Because I feel like we as citizens don't understand what does the city really want in order to surpass all these issues that we see today.
Thanks, Marvi. Absolutely. So we need professionalism and professional input. We need a lot more data and analytics and insight through research. Nasratullah, final thoughts from you? Just unmute yourself before you speak. Nasratullah?
I strongly believe we need fair accountability and shared responsibilities in order to combat climate change and its impacts, if it's in urban, or if it's in terms of urban development, or countrywide, or global, from global perspectives.
Fantastic, thank you, Nasratullah. And final word from Gopa, Samanta, Dr. Samanta.
Yeah, thank you very much. What I feel that, when you talk about cities, and if climate change is really going to take a high toll on the cities, then we have to think about who are going to suffer. And that is particularly the poorer people living in informal settlements, very, very vulnerable areas. So, in fact, what I feel that climate change is not only an environmental crisis, but it is going to be a big livelihood crisis for the poorer people living along the coast, even for the big cities and the smaller cities. Like how many fishers, fishing communities, people are dependent on the coastal areas. And also what I feel that if we look into the informal settlement areas, specifically the location of those areas, these are very, very vulnerable areas. So what I feel that if change is going to take a high toll, that toll will come to the poor migrants who are living in the city for their living, and that the gap between rich and poor will be more and more. So already there is an exclusionary process which is taking place due to neoliberal economy and the development of other kinds of activities in the cities. So we are seeing that more and more poor people and informal settlements are being evicted in different places. And I think that it will bring more crisis to these already poor people living in those cities who are even permanent, and the temporary migrants who come to the cities for their living. So that is my concern for the cities in India.
I think it's a concern that our audience members, those watching, and everybody on this panel, I think, shares. I think the other thing that's shared is kind of a common set of concerns that, you know, really transcend, as somebody said earlier, that transcend ordinary and normal sovereignty and distinctions between not just between countries, but even between cities. And so I think this was a really wonderful and enlightening conversation. And I'm so grateful to you, Rizwan, Marvi, Nasratullah, and Gopa, Samanta. Thank you all for participating. I hope we can do a lot more of these kinds of conversations. And I hope everyone that was watching got to learn as much as I did. Thanks once again for joining us. Signing out from the Tabadlab Policy Roundtable 15. Thanks again for joining, everyone. Khuda Hafiz. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Very much. Bye-bye.